Welcome to Robot Unicorn. We are so glad that you are here. As always, let's start the show with a question from Scott.
Jess, do you ever feel like on social media, people want you to show up authentically, but deep down, it's hard for people to accept like any negative, let's say negative emotions? And I say that in quotation marks or air quotes. Like, for instance, you can show up and you can talk about how tricky a situation is with the girls or something like that, or a work situation. But if it's a little bit too far on the negative side, or you're having a really hard time with it, then all of a sudden people kind of expect you to mask those true feelings.
Yeah, that's been a common theme, I think, in the last 7-ish years of doing social media. It feels sometimes like being authentic is okay, but only to a point. So I'll give you 2 examples. First, when I was struggling after weaning our youngest, I think I expressed how it was really hard for me to wean her. And at the time, I mean, people didn't know, but now I can look back and be like, I definitely was going through some post-weaning depression. Like, I think the sadness that I had when I was weaning her was more than I was really able to explain to anybody at the time. And I know it was like a hormonal thing and all of that. But I remember trying to share that and people were like just shutting me down. Like, oh, well, you're lucky you even breastfed her to begin with. And this is insensitive to parents. And I don't think people were able to hold the truth of like, it's actually okay for Jess to be really struggling with this. And that doesn't take away from anybody else's experiences. And people also would say to me, well, just stop posting about this on social media and go breastfeed her again. Like stuff like that, right? So that made me feel unsafe to share what I was actually going through, so I didn't. And then later, back in December and January of this year, I was going through another tough time, really feeling burnt out and struggling with burnout. And I actually had scaled back from doing stories quite a bit. And one day, there's literally only one story slide up, which said, I took a shower tonight, I did some meditation, and I'm feeling really good. I'm trying to get out of this state of burnout that I've been in that's been so hard. And again, it was almost too hard for people to hear that I had been burning out. And they said, well, just get off social media then, stop posting about it. And it feels tricky for me because it's like, I want to be authentic because actually that's what I've built Nurtured First around, is being really open and honest and authentic. And I am. But sometimes when I'm struggling with something that's too heavy, if I share about it, I feel like it's just dismissed or shut down. But I want to be able to share about that online because I think sharing the authentic human experience is really important.
Yeah, and it kind of seems like that's the expectation, but only when, and I mean, this is very much a generalization, but it almost seems as though at times people want you to be authentic, but only if there's like a tidy little bow at the end of it and everything works out perfectly in the end.
And also, I'll be honest, as a therapist, I struggle with that too, because I really try to not post from wounds. Like I try and, I don't know if this makes any sense. This is what I call it in my own head. I say, don't post from a wound, post from a scar. Like, so I try and post from something that's like,
that you've healed.
I've healed. Like I've worked through this, I've processed this. Maybe it's not fully healed yet, but the scar is there. So it's not an open wound.
Why do you do that?
This is my own thing. I mean, we could unpack this for a long time, but I feel like as a therapist, I don't want anyone to feel like it's their responsibility to fix what I'm going through.
Right.
And I truly believe that even when I do post from a wound, like when I was burnt out, I did not think it was ever my community at Nurtured First, their responsibility to fix what I was going through.
Right.
But I just wanted to be open with them to say, this is part of the human experience. Sometimes you burn out and like, that's okay. Here's what I'm doing to get myself out of it. But I would never want to put that on my audience. Like, send me nice messages so that I feel better. Like, that's not their responsibility. So that's why I try and post from a scar to say, I've actually processed this on my own time with my own therapist or friends or family. And here's what I've come to. And here's how I've processed it and that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I just wonder, like, is that actually authentic though? So then I would challenge you. So I do understand what you're saying, but also in the same sense, you're saying you want to post and we want to talk about things online authentically. And sometimes, like, you have a wound that's open for a long time and it's not something that can be healed over the course of
a day,
a few days, a few months, even a few years. Like, there are things I can say from experience that are going to be constantly open wounds.
That's where I struggle. And anyone listening, like, I would love your feedback on this because I want to be able to share those right? And I feel like right now, so now, for example, I've shared my journey with post-weaning depression with our youngest because it is wrapped up a little
Yeah.
bit more, right?
There's a tidy bow on that story.
And so it is authentic because I've taken this time to process it, to work through it on my own, and I can share that story now, and there is an ending to it. So I still think it's authentic because I have done that work and I'm sharing my true story, but it's the end of the story. And where I struggle is I want to actually be able to post some of the stuff, the things I feel comfortable sharing, as I'm in the messy middle of it. But that's where I don't know what that balance should look like. And I think that's what Sarah and I talked a lot about today in this interview is where is that balance?
I feel like she's very wise on the subject. Like she honestly talks about how some things, they're not completed or they're not something that you can have a positive ending necessarily immediately or potentially ever. And it's just something you have to live with. And I feel like that is real. That is authentic.
Right. And if we can't share about that, the messy middle of these situations, and we can only ever share things that are in a tidy bow, then you're right. Then everybody just thinks, well, my story's not in a tidy bow yet.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think about you and your journey last year. Like it wasn't a tiny bow.
Well, I mean, I'm even still dealing with that now. So it's not like it's going away.
Yeah. And my journey with, let's say, being an anxious person, like I think I've developed a lot of tools and things to deal with it, but there's never going to be an end date. Like I'm always going to have anxiety. It's always going to be a piece of who I am. But it's difficult to share that. And that's where Sarah talked a lot about masking. Then you show up and you act like everything's fine when really it's not.
Is that because people are just uncomfortable with those kinds of feelings and their discomfort is what makes them say, like, stop sharing about this? Can it bring other people down kind of with you into those trenches or open wounds for people as well, seeing you in those situations?
I think, I mean, for me, again, as a therapist, I feel like I have a different lens on this. If people are seeking me to be someone who they're following, right, and they're like is a leader to them to share a wound, I think it can be very, very healing. Like I think there's that too, like, hey, I'm going through the same thing. Thank you so much for sharing this. It helps me to know that you're a human being. But B, it could also be like, oh, this person who I'm learning from is human. And a lot of us haven't done our own work to be okay with humanness. And they want to see someone who's leading them, like me or like Sarah, as people who have it all together. Right? Because I look up to you and I want you to have it all together so that I can eventually have it all together as well. But I think there's a lot of beauty in saying every person that you look up to is still human and they're still working through their own crap. Like we all are. Yeah. And that's the beauty. And you can be both. That's something I've been really working on this last year. It's like I can be multiple things. I can be an amazing leader and educator, which I do believe that I am. And I can be a human that struggles with feelings of burnout and anxiety and whatever it is, post-weaning depression, that doesn't take away from the other things that I am. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I think it does.
I absolutely love this conversation with Sarah Landry from The Bird's Papaya. Sarah and I actually met for the first time many years ago. We talk about it in the conversation, but we both lived in the same town. I have followed her since she had a couple hundred followers on Instagram, and now she has over 2.3 million followers. She is a mom of 4 kids, from a toddler to her oldest just graduated from high school, who talks about body confidence. She's also a speaker, a model, and a weekly podcast host. Sarah has so much wisdom to say about everything from body confidence to talking about her own mental health struggles very vulnerably online. So I think that all being said, in this episode today, Sarah is very vulnerable. And so I would just say, as you listen to it, take care of yourself. If you are in a very vulnerable state, just know that we do talk about things like mental health. We talk about PMDD and we talk about feeling suicidal. So just please be mindful of that as you listen to today's episode. Take care of yourself. And this was an amazing discussion. I'm really excited for you to listen. So without any further introduction, let's dive in. So Sarah, I was just watching your stories right before we're recording this podcast, and I saw you talking about your experience with PMDD, and maybe you can explain a little bit about what that is if people have not heard about it before. And I saw that it's just been a really difficult week for you, and I just wanted to check in before we get talking about anything else that we're talking about today.
Yeah, so PMDD is something that, like most people, I learned about on social media. It is not something that I was aware existed. There's some fellow creators that I saw talking about their symptoms, and I honestly didn't relate. I was like, okay, like that sounds awful. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, must be so hard to navigate. I've always struggled with like anxiety disorders and things like that, but nothing really too extreme. I had prenatal depression, so that was my only ever bout of depression. But about a year postpartum, I started really tinkering with trying to take my health back into my hands. I feel like there was a lot of things up in the air early postpartum. And I started to have this like bit of cyclical issues that were happening, anxiety, depression, nothing too extreme or too alarming. But I started tracking my headaches actually. And so when I
Mm.
started tracking my headaches, I had suspicions that they were around my period. And I started tracking them. And when it came up on the Apple Health app, it prompts you for like mood things as well. So I would start inputting those things. And it wasn't long before I recognized that there was a cycle to the anxiety and depression and these like really bizarre thoughts that I would have. And it's weird because it's almost like, did I just like, is this a self fulfilling prophecy? Did I just like, now that I'm paying attention, it's there? But over time, it really did start to get worse while I was experiencing other symptoms of hormonal imbalance, which is a whole other podcast. But essentially, what PMDD is, it's called premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And it's similar to PMS, but it's a very extreme form. So, just a trigger warning, some of the things I'm going to talk about
Yeah.
are including self harm here. But I remember one of the first months after I'd sort of had some suspicions about it. And I was driving and I was very, very, very overwhelmed. And I just thought, it would just be easier if I just drove my car off the road because then I wouldn't have to deal with all of this and it would delay everything. I would just be able to just be somewhere else and not have these responsibilities, not have this like overwhelming dread that I was experiencing. And that wasn't the first time I thought that. That was a repeated thing. And I went and I talked to my doctor about it. And her first thing, it was actually not my actual doctor, it was like a sub in. And her first thing was, are you sure like that's not just part of motherhood? Like we hear a lot of mothers say
Oh,
things
wow.
like that. And I was like, I've been a mother for 17 years and I've never entertained the idea of driving my car off the road. Anyways, I did get the process of going through getting diagnosed first by my naturopath who recognized it as she experiences it herself, and then through my general practitioner. And I started, the path of understanding it a little bit more. It felt really weird because I'd heard it been talked about so much online, but I never really absorbed it in the way that suddenly I was like, I couldn't get enough information because I was so desperate for an answer. And I think I was also so relieved that I wasn't just, I think when you struggle with anxiety or depression and it kind of comes and goes, it's hard to ever take it seriously. And so when I started being able to recognize the pattern, a lot of things became glaringly obvious. I was not actually doing well for a while. And there's a lot of times that I had become very, very sad and distant and just chalked it up to life or whatever. And because it's in the cycle and you go back to feeling quote unquote normal, it was really hard for me to pinpoint. But about 2 months ago, after I started SSRIs, I had taken my medication late and did not catch it on time. My period came early. It was like a whole bunch of things all at once. I had a really stressful week. And I remember I'd never struggled with suicidal thinking before, but in this sense, I just wanted my brain to stop. I just wanted it to stop. And I remember thinking, this is not me. This is the PMDD. And if I say something, it might save my life. So I told my husband and we told a couple others and we just like safe protected me for those few days. And after that happened, about 4 weeks later, I just like couldn't, I was on vacation with my family and I was looking at them and I was thinking, oh my God, like I was so close to losing my life to something that I'm not talking about. And it's such a huge part of my life. It's so uncomfortable. I literally hate talking about it, but it feels so important because I feel like it is women's health in general is so under discussed. We're so good at masking. We're so good at compartmentalizing and moving on. And I feel like it really took me pausing and paying attention to even get to the point of asking for help. And I just wanted, like the women before me who had been so brave to be so vulnerable about it, who saved my life, that I now in turn would hold that baton and be like, this is a real thing. It's really effing hard. And I'm here today because I got help. I'm here today because I'm not going to be quiet about this anymore. but also understanding it's a cycle. So I'm in it every month, and I am going to keep being in it every month until menopause or hysterectomy or another form of medication. We don't know. Right now, it's all about managing what is. And I will say I'm in my cycle right now, and I'm like at a level 4. And I said this in my stories, but a level 4 is so beautiful when you came from a level 0. A 4
Mhm.
is amazing.
Yeah.
A 4 is incredible. And I know that like the 8, 9, 10s are around the corner, but a 4 is life-saving. And so while I'm not the energetic, bubbly version of myself that I'm more comfortable with, the 4 version of me is just as lovable, just as valued, just as important, and just as worthy of showing up in spaces, even if it creates a ripple discomfort, I guess. That's the part I feel bad. That's the part I feel bad about. I don't like that it makes other people uncomfortable.
And now, the part of the show that you usually skip, but wait, don't touch that dial just yet, because today's sponsor might just change your life, or at least your bathroom habits. Let's talk about the potty toolkit from, yep, you guessed it, Nurtured First. Picture this. You're a parent staring into your toddler's eyes as they proudly poop in the corner. You've tried everything, letting them run around naked, promising them a toy pony if they use the potty, and even contemplating moving to a deserted island where diapers grow on trees. But nothing seems to work. Enter the Potty Toolkit by Nurtured First. This magical bundle of joy is designed to make potty training fun, easy, and, dare I say it, enjoyable for both you and your child. It's like having a team of potty training fairies at your beck and call, without the glitter and the creepy wings. The Potty Toolkit is packed with over 40 pages of stories, activities, games, and worksheets that will get your child excited to use the potty. And the best part? It's all backed by decades of research and designed by a team of child therapists who know their stuff. So if you're ready to ditch the diapers, head over to the link in the show notes and grab Potty Toolkit for 10% off. That's right, for less than the cost of a month's supply of diapers, you can have a fun-filled potty training experience. Don't wait, go to the link in the show notes now and get the Potty Toolkit by Nurtured First for 10% off today using the code ROBOTUNICORN. Your child and your bathroom floor will thank you.
I remember when you were sharing about it on your stories for the first time, that's probably a month or 2 ago, and you were saying that you were just, like, losing these followers and people were leaving, and it's incredible to me, and it shows kind of it goes back to your story about the doctor who didn't take you serious
Yeah.
and how people just think, "Oh, okay, well, this isn't serious," or maybe it makes them uncomfortable, and then they leave, and here you are sharing this incredibly vulnerable time of your life. Going through that experience, especially, it sounds like there was that 1 month that really change things for you, and maybe you were able it sounded like you were kind of able to mask things until you went through that month, and then that month was just what was it like coming out of that month? I know for me, like, I've experienced postpartum anxiety recently. I experienced a real big struggle that reminds me a lot of your story with weaning. So I was
Yeah.
pregnant or breastfeeding for probably 4 years, and
Yeah.
then I just this last summer weaned my youngest daughter, and when you talk about this elephant sitting on your chest, when you talk about life just feeling like it's so weighty and there's so much, and I wonder for you, I know we have some similarities in our lives, if there's like a weight on being like a boss and an employer and a mom and all these pieces. And I remember feeling similar. It's too much. Like I can't handle it. So how was it coming out of that month and like looking at your life and looking at what was that feeling like?
I wasn't like I felt a responsibility to my children to do something,
Yeah.
to my marriage to do something. As my job, I felt like we basically created a path in which I could quit. But I knew that's not what I wanted. I just wanted a way out from masking. I wanted a way out from the fear of others' approval, which is why I sort of created the method of like, I'm done in a year, show up as the version of yourself
Mhm.
that if you only had a year left online, who would you be and how would you be and how would you speak? But I think it made me really realize the severity of this and the severity of these issues, and that when we talk about so many things, we do it so reflectively. I do it all the time when I talk about body image stuff or moving past things or postpartum. It was so reflective. And I remember going through this last postpartum, I showed up in the mess of it. I showed up in like the emotions of it in the day of. And so I was like, there's such a gap in mental health where we see
Mhm.
people talk about it and then we see people be better from it and not a lot in the mess of it because it is uncomfortable. I struggle watching it. I struggle watching people go through things, but I knew this time was different because I almost didn't have a choice. And like I have 3 employees. It's not just me and my family, it's theirs as well. If I don't figure this out and if I don't move forward in a way that is like honest, I won't make it through even keeping this career. So I did feel a little bit of responsibility to, like, as a boss, as a leader, not having to be this version that I thought I had to be. And there's been so many women that I look up to who are so honest about their mental health and they run businesses and they do amazing things. And I realized a lot of my thoughts were incredibly ableist, that I've had this feeling that to struggle with mental health meant that I couldn't be a great mom, be a great boss, be a great leader, be a great creator. And I realized while working through that own internal thinking that you can be both. And like joy, and when we seek it, that's something I was talking about, was like I've been overly seeking these pockets of joy because I need them to live in my body. I need them to take hold. I need them to fight for me because when you're real sad, those bits of joy are your hope. They're like what you can look forward to. And so it's been, I think after that one cycle, I just looked at my whole life and I thought, my God, I so much that I have minimized, way too many things that I've maximized, like the power of what other people think of you. And I just wanted to be, as I've done before, I had to sort of unrestrict myself a little bit. I had to come out of that shell of need of validation, I guess. And I thought I'd never be in a place like that again, but it's hard. It really is
Yeah.
hard. People will assume what they will. And I know that now, but it just felt incredibly important to me that if I'm going to show up and be an honest version of myself, that I had to be fully honest. And I'm glad I have, even though it scares the crap out of me. And I genuinely, like I said, I hate talking about it because
Mhm.
it's the same way I hate being angry. I'm somebody so uncomfortable with emotions other than happy, but I'm really coming to grips with like that's what's going to get me through this. And I was sort of sharing today that like in my head I thought diagnosis was like okay, now we get to like move on. But diagnosis is like the first step on a staircase. And somebody commented and they're like, diagnosis is not treatment. And I was like, yes, yes, yes. We need to talk about how important diagnosis is, but without it being like this blanket, everything's better now. You're diagnosed, you've got words, you've got validation, you haven't been faking it, this is real. But really, you're on step 2 or 3 of the staircase. You've got a ways to go, but at least you're going, at least you're in the right direction. Today, I was driving my kids to school today and I kept in my head repeating that hopelessness is a feeling, not a state of reality. Nothing is without hope. And so I've sort of been just like, okay, I feel hopeless, but that's not real. So I know that like I am not without hope. And that makes me very driven and just sort of knowing that this fight isn't just about me, it's about so much more. My family, my coworkers, everything. It does put it into perspective a lot more.
Totally. Yeah, there's so many big things that you said there, like about your family and seeing your kids and being like, okay, I have this thing to fight for, and seeing your employees and being like, there is hope on the other side. And I think that's the thing when you're in it. I remember even being in it with my own postpartum anxiety or the weaning struggles. I have a name for it. With the weaning, I remember it was similar to what you're describing, where I'm like, something's wrong. Something doesn't feel right to me. I'm not quite sure what's going on. It feels, I think you maybe said this in your stories today. There's like an elephant in your chest, and it
Yeah.
just feels like it's so weighty. And I
So
remember feeling that. And I
mhm.
didn't really know what was going on, and then all of a sudden I realized I was weaning my daughter, and I did it on such a slow progress that it hadn't even really dawned on me, and then I was like, "Okay, I have a name, but I still have to experience it. I still have to go through the emotions." And I'm thinking to myself, like, "I'm a therapist. I know all these things. I know what I'm going through, but that doesn't make it less hard." That's kind of where you're in right now, right? Like, you have a diagnosis, you have a name, so there's hope with that. It's not
Yes.
you, there's something you're going through, but also you still have to live through it, and I love that you're showing up honestly. when you show up online like that, I know it helps so many women because they can see that they're not the only ones to feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, it really hit home when a mom messaged me and told me that her daughter had been hospitalized twice with self-harm, and they were really running out of hope. They didn't know what was wrong. They didn't know how to fix it. And she recognized some of the symptoms I was talking about in her own daughter and ended up getting her diagnosed. And now they have a path towards treatment and hope. And I thought, my God, if that were my 15-year-old daughter, I would only hope for people online that I would be able to give her hope. Right. And so it's so deeply uncomfortable, but I think we are at this crux of social media where people want real, but are we willing to sit in the discomfort of what that is
Yeah.
for everybody? And are we willing to like be real about that? Because I'm somebody who just likes to make people laugh. I like to make people think, and I like to make people laugh. I always say like I'll make you laugh or cry and there's not a lot in between. But I'm crying, when I'm the one that's like in it,
Yeah.
that's real different. I don't accept like even other people, like I can see my phone as we're sitting here lighting up with messages of people just showing support. And even that makes me uncomfortable because I'm still working through that. I'm just as lovable when I'm sad. I'm just as lovable when I'm like in the thick of it. And if I take care of myself and if I get better, and similar to yours, very hormonally charged. And if we talk about hormones more and we understand ourselves more, the connection between hormones and mental health, hopefully more and more people don't go through these stages of life where they just feel like this is just motherhood or this is just being a woman, and they realize that there's just major gaps in knowledge and there's major gaps in discussion. And it's really interesting, and I'm not going to blanket like diagnose or say this for anybody, but it's what's been really fascinating to me is how many people have said they've been diagnosed after they're done childbearing, because there's something about being pregnant that sort of sets your hormones at a new pace. So a lot of people, it can take several years, or it might get chalked up to something different. Like for a while, it was like, am I just getting postpartum a year late? Like, am
Right.
I just really late to this? Because I was breastfeeding. I was like, there were things that were leveling my hormones in a way that when I was sort of on my own and outside of childbearing and outside of nursing, suddenly got to see where my hormones were without all of these other interactions. And it made me really look all the way back to times in life where I'm like, oh, I've had these cycles before, but I never paid attention and I never gave it gravity because it's only if like it's I say only a few days. There's like it's like a wave, right? Like it crashes and then it comes back out. It's very interesting though, and I guess I just feel this level of I don't know how this all works. I don't know the answers. I don't have them yet, but I want to encourage other people to at least take the first step of just at least asking for help. Don't get to the point like me where you go so dark. And I actually had been seeking help by that point, but I don't know that I had been taking it seriously enough because I was sort of slacking on my tracking and taking medication on time. And that almost cost me my life. That's really important for me to and I think that that's changed my life forever, because once you fall out of alignment with your mind that way, there's a whole new level of I have to rebuild my self-trust. I have to rebuild my self-confidence in a very different way, because now I have to build up my confidence that I can trust my own brain, and that's new.
Yeah, the idea of trusting your own brain again is huge. Like,
Yeah.
especially when you go through an experience like that, that you've, from my understanding, you've never gone through that kind of like a suicidal thought. It's like so dark, like you have to be on a watch like that. So then the feeling that comes is like, I don't trust myself. I can't be alone. I think I was listening to a podcast with you and Shane, and I loved how you had Shane on and he was talking about how he helped you and stuff like that. And you guys were just sitting there and he was playing Switch or something.
And I think that's important too, because like when you do take it seriously, and after that did happen, it also allowed me to. So, for instance, Shane was actually away my last cycle. And so we had informed my neighbor, Becky, we had informed, family and friends. And that's uncomfortable to be like, I'm a small child and I need babysitting. That's how it felt for me. It just made me feel like so juvenile and like, oh God, this is like so embarrassing. But I'm so glad I did it, because even though I never got that low again, I was able to basically for work, I pause all major decisions. I let my team know I'm functioning at like a 4. Like just I'm at a 4, so I'm probably not going to be the best to answer any big questions right now. They can wait for a few days. I let my family know. We get really gentle about like what our meals are. We're like eat like incredibly nutrient dense food, like try and just like lean into comforts. Like my husband would make me like a bowl of soup. We just like lean into anything to get me comfortable and resting as much as possible. And we like kind of clear my schedule. It makes me feel like I'm somewhat unreliant, but it's important because it's like this is priority right now for these few days. It reminds me of postpartum when like you prepare for self-care. And I have to do that every month now. I prepare for self-care instead of getting into a catastrophe where it's like my only option is like on the couch. There is no other reality. So it is uncomfortable though. And I think that it's really nice that my husband now is in this cadence with me where he understands it enough that like when he asks me how I'm doing, I can be honest with him and I can be like, today's hard. He gets gentle with me for sure, but I don't feel embarrassed anymore. I don't feel like I'm a burden anymore. And
Right.
that part has been really important too, to sort of like shed some of the shame around struggling.
Yeah, I feel like the more you talk about it, the more it's shame goes away. But when you have it all, you're holding it all in your own head, the shame feels so heavy because it's like, oh, I can't say this to anyone. Even online, I can't say it. It'll be a burden. It'll be too heavy. People don't want to see this. But when you start talking about these things and the shame goes away. And I feel like you've
Yeah.
done such a good job of that on your page, even though, like you said, it's so uncomfortable. And I wonder, is we've talked about it being uncomfortable a lot. Is the uncomfortable feeling like it's too much for people? They're not gonna wanna see it? Or is like what's that uncomfortable feeling?
I think it's just the vulnerability hangover. I think it's just
Yes.
like okay, now I've like cried online. How do I move? And then I'm like, ha ha ha, here's a meme. Like, I don't want to stay here. I get so weird about it because it's like you release it. And you're right. Like when you hold on to something, it kind of sticks with you. Like, and I had the video I posted today has like literally been sitting in my drafts for a week because I'm like, I literally hate this so much. I'm so freaking uncomfortable. But then whenever I'm scared to post something, there's this weird part of me that knows it's important. Like I know it's like, okay, I kind of got to do this. And I know it's going to like emotionally charge some people and I know it's going to validate others and it's going to confuse some, but like that's not my responsibility. Like it's not my responsibility to answer to everybody's needs. It's my responsibility to be authentic and honest. And I felt when I was going through, actually, I'll tell you the true story. I was on the sofa feeling suicidal and I was trying to not let anybody realize that I was like away or that anything was wrong. So I was like
Mm.
casually posting little pictures or memes every couple hours in my stories to sort of appear that everything was fine. And somebody messaged and she said, I love when I see you quieter on stories because I know you're living your best life. Like you're just out doing all the good things. And I thought, I felt like a fraud. I felt like,
Aw.
no, I have to, if people only think that I'm happy and joyous and that doesn't also come with sadness or that happiness is, or like joy is, somehow void if you struggle, I think that's what's kind of hard. And I think a lot of my fears were also realized. I didn't talk about this on TikTok because I rarely post on there. And a few days after I sort of told everybody what I'd been going through, I posted an anniversary video on TikTok and somebody commented and they were like, I thought you were on the couch. Why are you like suddenly out? Like, I don't even know what they
Oh
said.
my
They said something
goodness.
like, don't you have enough attention with that many followers? Now you need to have something else going on. And I was
Oh
like,
my word.
if you only knew, if you only knew. And this is exactly what I feared, that once you become the sad girl, you can't have happiness. And once you say that this is going on in your life, even though when I shared about it, it had happened 6 weeks ago, that
Right.
like, because you share this one thing, it makes everything else not real or not existent. And I think that's what makes it so hard to share now is like, what happens afterwards? It's the vulnerability hangover. How do I just like also show up as like the happy version of myself when I just poured my heart out on this one thing? It's weird because when I've done the outpouring, it's like I'm releasing it. That's me being like, okay, I'm letting this go.
Yeah.
And so other people are receiving it and I'm already like a step ahead, right? Like I've already released it and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to move forward. And so I think there's a big part of mental health that's confusing. How can somebody both struggle so much with so many things and yet also live a beautiful, big, successful, happy life? How can
Right.
both things be true? And I think I need to figure out how to bridge that a little bit more for myself and how I show up, because that's the part I'm still so uncomfortable about.
Yeah, it's super tricky because people love hearing stories of mental health. I found this too on my 5 years online, but they like it more when it's neatly tied up and it's a testimonial. It's the end journey,
Mhm.
right? And I think you've talked a lot about that too in terms of your body image and all of that kind of stuff as well, that it's not necessarily the end journey. Like even with that, like you're still going through it. It's not like, okay, well, I went through this disordered eating and now I'm like this perfectly tied up bow and I never struggle with body image. The world loves black and white. They love this content that you're either struggling and now you're better. But that's often not the reality for the majority of us. And I know even with myself, like I've shared about, like I was telling you, postpartum anxiety. That doesn't mean I don't still have anxiety. I'm not in postpartum anxiety anymore, but anxiety will always be a piece of my life and just a piece of who I am. And I feel like that's what people want. So then that's where your struggle is because that's just not life.
Yeah, and I felt that with postpartum with my body, like sort of as you shared, I felt it very important to be honest with people that there is a grief step that you have to take, and I
Mhm.
had to take it. And because I had been such a neat bow from before, it was a little bit more of a healed version. Stepping back into postpartum really put me back in the trenches and reminded me how much body change can really shift your whole state of mind. And in order for me to be honest about that, I had to grieve, and I had to grieve openly the body I was, the life I had, in so I could receive the new version of myself, not so that I could shame who I was, but to allow the past versions of me to be put to bed and to be grieved properly and loved properly. And there's that beautiful quote that I've said so many times that my friend Nicole told me once, which was, grief is love with nowhere to go. And so when your body has changed, you have to grieve it so the love has somewhere new to land. And that's where I sort of felt was so important in sharing that, and being honest about the fact that for so long I would say things like self-love was so much about how you felt about yourself. And now I realize that to love yourself is the action of showing up for yourself. It's not the feeling. The feeling ebbs and flows. The feeling will come and go. Sometimes you'll get up in the morning and you'll be like, wow, like I really appreciate my body and I love it. And then there's other days where you're like, my mind is so loud with hate. And there's also some science now behind where we are in our cycles and where our brains
Mhm.
connect with how we feel about our bodies as well. But there is so many times throughout the month that you will have like bad body image days. And it's so fascinating because I'm like, I feel like even in my journey, recognizing how many times I've like sort of been like, just wear the shorts. And here I am, like, 5 years later going like, you don't have to wear the shorts if you don't want to. Like, it's totally
Yeah.
okay. Wear whatever you need to. Just show up. Figure out what that is. Figure out how you can be that person, how you can push past those thoughts, or how you can create comfort for yourself through them. Not this black and white version of like you go from hating yourself and then you suddenly love yourself. It's so weird. How can we do that for every other relationship in our life where we're like, we know the tangible acts it takes to love our children? We know the tangible acts it
Mhm.
takes to love a partner. But then for ourselves, we're like, I don't want to pick up socks off the floor. That's like mentally, like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to deal with those things. I just want to love what I see in the mirror. And
Yeah.
that's like the disconnect where we forget that the relationship with ourselves is a relationship, and it demands action. It demands certain sorts of maintenance and picking up the socks off the floor of our own minds,
Yeah.
because it's not so clean, it's not so easy. And I realize now that my own confidence doesn't come from what I look like, what I'm wearing, or what I'm doing, but more so how I choose to show up through discomfort and through some of those loud thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love how you said that our relationship with ourselves is like it's truly a relationship. And I think especially with the body positivity movement, a lot of people will say, "Well, I don't feel positive about my body every day." And it's like, "Well, that's okay. Like, you don't
Yeah.
have to. You don't always feel positive about your relationship with everybody. Like there is that time where it's okay to be neutral. It's okay to say, "Yeah, I don't really want to wear the shorts today." And that's okay too."
Absolutely. Create comforts for yourself. Show up. Like at the end of the day, like even did like an ode to the one piece bathing suit because I felt like there was such a drive for just like wearing bikinis, but that
Yes.
feels like another thing for people to have to like feel like they failed at when they don't want to bear it all. They don't have the ability or the capacity to find all that confidence that day. And it's not because they're not worthy of it. It's just like it's not like if you want to shut your brain off, wear as much clothing as wear a sweatsuit. Like, doesn't matter. Like, do whatever you need to show up in your life because we sideline ourselves from how we feel about our bodies. We sideline ourselves when we feel unworthy. And so when we recognize that, like, the bad days are just as worthy as the good days. The days that you feel the most unlovable, you're just as lovable. It's just different and it demands a different type of love. I'm saying this out loud and I'm listening to myself talk and I'm realizing like this is literally what I need to apply to my life because I do it so well when it comes to the body because I've worked so hard on that. But when it comes to my mind and my mental health and my emotions, it's still uncomfortable. That's just it. It's uncomfortable to feel lovable when you're messy.
Absolutely. It's so hard to feel lovable and you're in this mess, right? I feel like with the body image and all the things you talk about, you've been talking about this for so long that it's something that you've worked on a lot, whereas the PMDD, that's new. I was going to say to you, I don't know if you know this about me, but I actually followed you when you had less than 1,000 followers.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
You're
I was
OG.
there since the beginning of your page because
My gosh.
That time of the show, folks. The time where we shamelessly self-promote Nurtured First. Picture this. You're peacefully playing with your toddler until all of a sudden, they're hiding behind the couch. But they're peering just far enough above the cushions to stare you straight in the eyes as they go red-faced and proudly poop. You've tried everything, letting them run around naked, promising them a toy pony if they used the potty, and even contemplated moving to a deserted island where diapers grow on trees. But nothing seems to work. Enter the Potty Toolkit by Nurtured First. This magical bundle of joy is designed to make potty training fun, easy, and, dare I say it, enjoyable for both you and your child. It's like having a team of potty training fairies at your beck and call, without the glitter and creepy wings. The Potty Toolkit is packed with over 40 pages of stories, activities, games, and worksheets that will get your child excited to use the potty. And the best part? It's all backed by decades of research and designed by a team of child therapists who know their stuff. So, if you're ready to ditch the diapers, head over to the link in the show notes and grab the Potty Toolkit for 10% off. Don't wait, go to the link in the show notes and get the Potty Toolkit by Nurtured First for 10% off today using the code ROBOTUNICORN. Your child and your bathroom floor will thank you.
So I lived in Guelph too for 11
Yeah.
years.
I met
And
you on the streets outside the market. I remember.
I remember, yeah, when we met you in the streets outside the market, you probably had maybe 40 or 50,000 followers or something like that at that time. And when I found your page, you were kind of in the midst of still your own disordered eating journey. And for me, I found your page and I liked it and I followed it because I was also in the middle of my own disordered eating, struggles with eating journey. And so I remember you would post things like, how much calories does a salad dressing
Oh
have?
yeah.
And I'm
Oh
sure you
yeah.
remember all those posts.
There's a reason
Yeah.
I left those all up.
Yeah.
It's important to see the evolution of someone. Yeah, it's wild though.
It is wild, yeah, and so I remember I followed you for because I was in the same journey, and then it's been interesting over that must have been, what, 8 years ago? So I remember finding your page, and I was kind of in the same journey, and you had your purple hair, and I loved your purple hair, and just all of those things back then, and it's been really interesting just watching this, like, true evolution of your page over the years. Like, you've really gone from this account that talked about weight loss and your weight loss journey to now where you're talking about loving your body, embracing it, or even just being neutral, the relationship with your body. And that's been a journey that I've been on too. So it's been really cool to kind of be on that journey together.
Yeah. Oh, it's so real. And it's also, I kind of love it. I kind of love that it's been such a journey because I feel like we do meet a lot of people online that sort of have it figured out. And I love that people can scroll back and go all the way to when it was all of the things that I used to say and watch me
Yeah.
hit rock bottom and come back from that. And I back then when I hit rock bottom and I knew that I was like I no longer could responsibly be a weight loss account. This was like what I was promoting was potentially dangerous. It had become dangerous for myself. I needed to get out of
Mhm.
it. And it took me a long while to like really figure that out. And I feel like I'm sort of at that crux again where like I recognize that I hit a weird rock bottom that I didn't see coming and that I felt sort of on the top of my game. And I wrote this once, but I haven't actually posted it. But just when the other shoe drops in your life and then you figure out how to pick it back up, you no longer have to like walk around with that fear of like the other shoe is going to drop in your life. And
Mhm.
I feel like because this happened to me at like a peak of my life, where, I'm feeling pretty good about my body. I feel like my family is amazing. I've got a beautiful career. I've got a beautiful marriage. I've checked all the boxes. Like I should need of nothing. To hit rock bottom then feels like the other shoe dropping, but now I know I can pick it back up. And I know that it's probably going to require some discomfort. It's going to require change. It's going to require me showing up differently. But yeah, you reminded me of that. It's like I've been here before, just in a
Yeah.
different way. I've hit different rock bottoms, and whether it was divorce or with body image, and there's always a way out from that. And I think that's what's cool about life in itself, is that even when you've checked off all the boxes on the list, you might still have a ways to go. And I think that's where I am.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a powerful, like even in therapy, it's this like thing that we talk about where telling yourself the story of when you've done something hard before and you've gotten through to the other side. And I was thinking about that too. And I was thinking about like when I first found you and where you were and what your content was about and stuff like that at the time. And now I can see how you've come out and you've come to this point of healing and it's taken a lot of work for you. So you've gone through this whole process before, but now you're kind of in there again. But I think what's always been great about you and which I admire so much is you've always really valued showing up authentically and being open about the mess. And
Mm,
like you've been willing to say, okay, well, this is what I've been doing, but you know what, that's not really working anymore. So I'm going to share my life in a new way. And I feel like you did that a lot with your journey with your body. Like you were able to say, you know what, no, I don't want to be this weight loss account anymore. That doesn't align with who I am. And
yeah.
you shifted gears and then you started being honest. And I think people really value, and that's why they love you so much. And that's why I've always followed you and loved your page too, is like your transparency and your willingness to be open about the messy part that a lot of people aren't usually open to share.
Which is a way harder when you have anxiety, because let me tell you, I've already
100%.
created 45 different scenarios of how poorly this could all go and how
Oh,
misconstrued it can become, and how I've already answered the questions to why everyone is going to hate me for this. And you do that to yourself. So I think it's also important to sort of note that in the level of showing up authentically, it's also shedding that massive fear of rejection that I feel
mhm.
has followed me my whole life. But when you're anxious and online and millions of people have eyes on you and they're just waiting for you to screw up, kind of show them your hand, be like, you know what, I am going to screw up. I'm a freaking human and this has been hard. And I've been hiding parts of myself and I've been trying to show up online authentically. But the reality is, I'm really still scared about what people think. And I'm really still scared about what this all means for me. And being honest about that too, because I think that there's so much that people are just like, how do you get to the point of like being able to talk about this stuff? And it's like, I don't know, with my knees freaking shaking every single
Yeah.
day. It is not easy, but I swear to God, it is easier than masking and pretending and showing up as being authentic and vulnerable, but really just hiding the parts of yourself that you feel are so unlovable. And for the longest time, I thought that was my stretch marks. And then I thought it was my apron belly. And then I thought it was going through divorce. I thought it was all of these things. And time again, you get so humbled into what really matters in life. And I think that this has just sort of really shaken me up, and in a really good way, because I think that I hope that because it really made me want to quit everything, that it's really made me show up in a new way where it's like I already did quit. And
Yeah.
so now it's no longer this looming threat over me. And I hope that people will see me take more breaks. I hope people will see me share uncomfortable things or be honest about when I don't want to. I hope that people get the version of me that I feel I had for a split second years ago. And then, a pandemic happened and everything. And there's a big part of me that's like, the online space has shifted a lot in the last few years. And I think it's caused a lot of people to become smaller versions of themselves. And I want to sort of break that wall down again. I kind of want to stop worrying about every tiny move and just start trying to make them. And I texted my friend this morning. She's actually one of my employees, but I was like, I have a very honest video, but I'm scared. But usually when I'm scared, it's important. And she goes, I think you should. I wish I had someone like you when I was younger. So for little
Mm.
me, I think you should. We are all little specks of dust floating on a rock. Do whatever you want. And I was like, screw it. And I pressed share. And that's all it took was like somebody just reminding me, like, what is all of this matter in the end of the day? And sometimes that sounds like so morbid, but it's like, who
Yeah.
cares? Like when you realize the gravity of like what we're talking about here, what people online are going to think about you, and you realize like how much more it's important that you're existing and here and being authentic, it sort of like shook me into a new reality where she was like, we're just specks of dust floating on a rock. And I was like, yeah, who cares about my video post? It was so like refreshing to have that. And I hope more people can kind of figure that out. It's like you kind of got to be, you got to kind of cringe if you're going to make it in the creator world. You've got to let yourself cringe at yourself, and even though that's 100% what I'm doing today.
Yeah, I totally get that. I feel like any post that I've done too where I'm like, "Ooh, I don't know," like,
Yeah.
it feels a little uncomfortable, it feels a little big, but when I share it, yeah, and then people can resonate with it in a whole different way, but it does feel scary. I totally understand that, and I
Yeah.
love what your friend said. I honestly have that visualization so many times too. If someone is upset or I get a nasty DM, I'll just, like, think about myself in the grand scheme of the world and all the people and be like, "'Kay, if what I posted did help someone, like even one person, then I guess it's worth having someone mad at me or having someone saying it was too much." And yeah, there's just like a lot of unpacking of like this feeling of being too much or just how vulnerable it can feel to share things in this space for sure.
Yeah, you're always too much for some and never enough for others. It also weirdly, I hate this about us in general, but it weirdly comforts me that you also sometimes get a nasty DM because I'm like, what could possibly anybody say to you? I saw somebody doing this like embroidery video and she was like, not everybody like appreciates this art. And then somebody else who's a sculptor was like, that's not art, it's a craft. And then everyone started arguing and I was like, okay, so you really can't even embroider anything online without people like arguing now. So I think we're just like in the state of like, how do you be authentic when people are like, can you stand your ground? Can you stand your ground? Can you be yourself? Can you still produce content in the face of that? Right. And I don't know, like it's a weird club to be in when you're like, I get nasty DMs sometimes and like not everybody likes me. And it's like this weird, I know it's like announcing that you're like unlovable to some, and but really it's a drop in the bucket to what really matters. And accounts like yours that really make a difference for people, it requires you to not have everybody like you. But it is weirdly refreshing. Although I am sorry you get those DMs. I am
You know,
weirdly
whenever you share
refreshed.
about the nasty DMs, I feel the same way. I'm like, Sarah, like who could have anything bad to say about her? She's
Oh
the best.
yeah.
Can you remember like the nastiest DM that you've received?
Ooh, some people just like go off on like your appearance. I've had
Mm.
people mock, this is so wild, but because I've like modeled underwear, I've had people like mock openly like my vagina. I've had people
Oh my goodness.
accuse me of altering my size, or yeah, like just a lot of like sometimes you'll open a message request and you'll see them be like, you're annoying or you're ugly or you're this or you're that, and then you scroll and you see like hundreds of messages that you've never seen of them just like attacking every little bit of you, from like your hair is frizzy, your skin is stupid, your eyelashes are dumb, like your brows are stupid, like you're ugly, you're nothing, you're this. And you're just like, what in the world is
Mm.
this? Like for so long. I think that's where it's like, it makes you feel unsafe in your own space when you're like, whoa,
Yeah.
there's people just like watching just to insult you, or like their hate following. That part's really weird for me.
I'm curious. I kind of wanted to go back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Your kids. So you share so openly about PMDD and your body and all of that kind of stuff. And I know you have a couple teenagers and then of course little Lemmy who's so sweet, who's a toddler. How do they respond to like you sharing this stuff? And how do you have those discussions with them before you share these things online? Because I'm sure they like your teenagers, I'm sure they follow you and stuff like that as well.
It's interesting. I grew up in a very mental health positive home. So my mother had gone through a hysterectomy at 34. So she went through like a lot of, she had endometriosis. So she went through menopause at 34. And I was a child witnessing my mom going through menopause and going through like mental health struggles with that. And she was really open about it. And even though I never really felt connected to that. I was like, well, that's not me. It did create a lot of empathy and understanding watching somebody else go through it, especially somebody who is such a brave hero in your mind, like your mother is. And
Mhm.
so I think when it came to talking about mental health, we always have. And we've been really, really open. And my oldest daughter has shared before, as she's given consent to she struggles with seasonal affective disorder. So she experiences SAD. And I was like, it's because we've had such open, honest conversations about these things that she was willing to raise her voice to say, I feel like something's off with me, and being able to advocate getting help and support as well. It's not, I mean, if it were Gemma, if we're talking about Gemma, she will probably make a joke that makes me shake out of a sad feeling. She's very good at being very sarcastic and dry and humor and a little dark. And I love that because she knows when I'm down, that's the peak time to sort of like bring me a good meme, bring me a dark joke, or she'll be like, snap out of it. And I'll be like, I can't. She'll be like, well, you could try. Like, she's very good at like sort of alleviating some of the heaviness about it. But I think it's been so refreshing. I think growing up with a mother who was so honest with us and watching how kind she is, how generous she is, how brave she is, how beautiful she is. And I never othered her because she struggled with mental health. I always saw it as part of the whole package. Like she was both joy and she experienced sadness. So that I, as a mother, as I tried to do this for so long before I left my previous marriage, I tried to hide sad parts of me. I tried to, I used to call it like falling on the sword for the family. I tried to just be this like big, brave person. And the kids always saw it. When we talked about it afterwards, they always knew. Like they always were aware when I was sad, even when I was like trying to mask it. They understood it. So I think it gives them a lot of understanding when I'm like, Mom's going through this right now. This is what it feels like. It's nobody's fault. This is just what's going on with me. So they never feel like, is she mad at me? Is she disappointed in me? Is this my fault? They just have now like my kids will come over and be like, are you okay? And they'll give my little squeeze of a hand. And like, they're just so, it makes me emotional because I'm like, as hard as it is to be honest about your mental health as a mother, it is so beautiful to watch your kids become empathetic humans. And like that's our role, is to teach them how to be adults in this world, how to be in this world. And I'm so grateful that they're empathetic. And I can only hope that me being honest with them helps them recognize things for themselves, but also understand things for other people, like I did when I hadn't experienced depression or anxiety for a really long time, but my mother had. And all I did was love her. All I did was respect her. All I did was empathize with her and be with her. And so, as hard as it's been for me, I'm so glad that I've been honest with them because they have been just beautiful in the way that they respond back. And they make me so, so proud that they're the people that will carry on the next parts of this world, I guess.
Wow, yeah, you definitely have me feeling emotional too, just hearing the way you talk about your mom. Like to hear a daughter talk about their mother who struggled with mental health, but also shared the joys and all of these different things with such love and admiration. And I know just from watching your page that you have this close relationship with your mom. I think
Yeah.
it's so beautiful that you've been able to take that in and share that with your kids as well. And I thought something that was really interesting that you were saying is like how even when you were trying to mask, so when you were going through your divorce and you're going through that messy period, your kids still saw and they still knew that you were struggling. And now you're kind of come around the other side and just like, I'm just going to tell them, I'm just going to be open with them. It's going to show them that I can be both the happy mom, the mom that does the school drop offs, all that stuff, and a mom who sometimes struggles. I think like what more beautiful thing than showing our true humanness to our kids and saying to our kids that it's not their job to fix it though. Like this is how
Yeah.
I feel. This is what I'm going through. It's not your job to fix it, but I'm
Yes.
human. And I think for your children to see that, that's so powerful.
Yeah, it's been really inspiring to see them adapt. I think we all worry about, I mean, what's the report card on parenting going to be? How do we ever find out
Right.
if we did a good job? And we don't. And there's these little blips of moments where you're like, I think I did the right thing. And that's one of them, even speaking to the sense that they always knew. There was one day that I put on an old shirt or something and Bowden walked in the house and he looked at me and he goes, I don't like this. And I was like, what? He's like, I don't like this outfit you're wearing. And I was like, why? What the heck, man? Like, what did I do? And he's like,
Mm,
it reminds me of old mom and it's making me sad. And I was like,
mm,
oh, they literally have in their brain old mom and new mom. And until
mhm,
that moment, I didn't know it because I had triggered him remembering a version of me that was sort of a shell of myself. Because that's what happens when you mask for too long. That's what happens when you try and pretend that everything's okay. It does eventually catch up with you, it does eventually come to the surface, and then everyone knows it. Right. And so,
mm.
it was really interesting in this weird moment years after it happened. I think he was like, maybe he was like 9 or 10 at the time, that he saw me wearing a shirt and was like, that reminds me of old mom. And it wasn't until that moment I really realized to the gravity that they remembered a different version of myself, a version that was like really a shell, just surviving. And so, as much as this is all such a struggle right now, going through these cycles, there's a part of me that's like, I've gone through harder moments and harder times. And at least this is like, I am, like I said, that staircase, I'm stepping up in the right direction. And I know that it's not without hope. And I know that my kids, like you said, it has never been their responsibility and it's never been something for them to fix. And it's nice seeing them get to continue on their lives and find happiness and joy and not feeling the weight of my sadness in any way. And I think I owe a lot to that to my husband too, because he really does set it up for success, where he's like, mom's going through her thing. Like, we're just going to get her comfortable on the couch. Like, we're just, not that it sounds like I'm like couch bound the whole time. I'm not. But like,
No, totally.
I'm just very honest with them. I'm like, I'm having a sad day. Like, I might cry, guys. Like, that's just where we are at. And they're like, that's okay. Like, that's like whatever. And they're all open with me, like usually they're teenagers, but a big part of it too, like even going back to what you said about my own mom, like sometimes I will talk about something that's like big and heavy. And what I find so beautiful is my mom will often comment and she'll be like, you know that I know, and here's the things that I've learned. And I'll watch her go comment on some of my friends' pages when they're having a hard time. And
Aw.
there's a certain level of empathy when you know what it's like, that you show up for other people in a really understanding, compassionate way without a how can I help?
I think that's just such a beautiful place for us to wrap up too. And like we talk about parenting all of the time on our page, and that is exactly it, right? Like that nurtured relationship, helping your kids feel safe, feel seen by you, and feel heard. I mean, that's it. If we can do those things, I mean, of course there's tons of other tips and stuff like that, but that relationship that you have with your mom where you're like, I see that you can struggle and that you still love me and that you'll always be there for me and you're even there for my friends. And now
Yeah.
your kids see that in you, like, that is like, that's winning at parenting. That's the parenting report card right there. And I really think that you're doing that and you're modeling it also to, I mean, literally millions of people online. And I just, yeah, I wanna say I just admire you. I think you're doing such an amazing job, and I hope that my girls can see that too when I struggle or when I'm sad or something like that. I hope that they can see all of those things, the both and that you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're just raising really beautiful humans when we allow them to see our own humanness in the best ways possible. Right. So it's a delicate line, but it's so worth it. I think as parents, to raise empathetic kids is so worth it, even if it means a little bit of discomfort along the way.
Yeah, exactly, and like you said, those uncomfortable conversations, whether it's with our audience, whether it's with our kids or our own parents, like those are the ones where we show the messiness, we show the true humanity that I think have the biggest difference and build the most real relationships and are just the most impactful for us. And I think it's just great that we've been able to really talk about that today.
Yeah, honestly, I think this has been so interesting timing wise, because I'm literally I woke up just in a horrific way. And so, I mean, it is messy. And I think that that's important. Like, anybody listening is like, probably like, wow, you have a lot to figure out. Yeah, I do. And that's okay. Like, a lot of us do. And we don't have to wait to be a perfect version of ourselves, because it's never going to come. It's never going to happen. You're never going to have a perfect body. You're never going to be in the perfect state. You're never going to have the perfect anything, but how can we show up in the mess? And I think that while I've done that so much for my body along the ways, it's time for me to do that for my mind and my heart too. And so I appreciate you allowing me to sort of share from such a raw space, because it is deeply uncomfortable, but I think it's also important. And so it's really been lovely.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate having you on, and I'm so glad that we could have this conversation. Thank you so much for being so open. For anyone who wants to check you out, where can they find you?
I'm mostly on Instagram and in stories at the Birds Papaya. So that's where I am almost all the time. Unfortunately, if you're a story watcher, you're going to watch a lot of them. I don't like to shut up.
Yeah, I love that about your stories. There's always something new.
Top of the screen. It's like concerning amount, but I'm always like, oh my God, there's this. Oh my God, there's that. It's like a really fun little trait that I have is never stopping.
Well, thank you so much again, Sarah. It's been great.
Thank you.
Let's head over to coffee time where Scott and I share some of our reflections from this amazing conversation. Something I loved that Sarah talked about in this episode is she talks so highly about her mom. And I feel like we've done so many shows about reparenting and cycle breaking. And there was something that just made me teary even listening to the episode again about how she talks about her mom with so much respect and love, and talks about how her mom struggled with mental illness, but she was able to embody being okay with having all sorts of different emotions, and how Sarah really looks up to her for that. That really stood out to me because that's something I want for our kids. I don't want them to see us as always happy. Like, my parents were never sad and they always were happy and they were perfect. Like, I don't want that for them.
I don't think the girls are ever going to say that.
Yes, we're not. But I do want them to see that or remember about us that we had lots of different feelings, but it was never their responsibility to fix how we felt. And I feel like that's a balance that parents really struggle with.
Why?
Because like I'll get asked by parents a lot of the times, like, let's say I'm going through something really hard. Someone passed away in my family and I'm crying a lot. How do I tell my child about my grief and not make my child feel like they're responsible for making me happy? I think a lot of our kids, especially our sensitive kids, I see this in our middle daughter all the time, they want us to be happy. So if they see a sad parent, they're like, they try and be playful or silly or do things to make us happy. But I want our kids to be able to tolerate the discomfort and to know that it's actually okay if mommy is feeling sad today. Like, it's not your job to make me happy. I'm feeling sad today. So I'm going to take a bath, or I'm going to listen to some sad music and let out some tears. But it's not your responsibility to make me happy.
But is she going to understand that though? Like, at what point, at what age do they truly understand that? Like, for our 4-year-old, she's kind of at the beginning stages of understanding that. But when she was 3 and younger, she would still try and make us happy if we were ever sad or angry or whatever, annoyed. But it's not as though you can like explain that to her, that this is not your responsibility. You don't have to fix it. And sometimes we just have to feel these feelings. Like, how do you do that?
I think it's okay, even if you're not explaining it to them, but you're showing that to them. So as an example, you wouldn't be bawling your eyes out and say to your kids, come here, you have to give me a hug. You have to comfort me.
Oh, I see.
You know what I mean? They might come to you and they might give you a hug and you say, that's okay. Like, thank you so much for giving me a hug. But if that's happening to me, I'm going to go to you for comfort, my partner, right? I'm not going to turn to my kids. Or you're not going to say to your kids, do something funny. Mommy's crying so much. Like, I need you to make me happy. It's in the way that we're modeling it to our kids more so, I think, than even the specific words that we're saying.
I can see it though, that let's say our oldest daughter or even our middle would come up to us and give us a hug. And my default would probably be to say, oh, that makes me feel so much better.
Yeah. And I think that's okay. Again,
so what's the difference though?
Again, there's nuance. And I don't want parents thinking, oh, it's not okay if your kid hugs you, because I think there's a beauty in the fact that our children are born empathetic and we don't want to crush that out of them either. But there's a big difference. So let me paint you 2 scenarios. So one scenario is, let's say me, what I talked about at the beginning, struggling with postweaning depression. So I'm sad. I'm crying a lot. There's a difference between our oldest daughter coming up to me and being like, oh, mommy, you're sad, giving me a hug, and me being like, thank you so much. Like, when you give someone a hug when they're sad, that feels really good. Like, that really helped me. Thank you. There's a difference between that and I'm crying and my daughter's playing and I'm like, honey, can you please come here? Mommy's so sad. I really need a hug from you to feel better. Oh, I'm so sad right now. And making it her job to give me a hug, to go away from her play, to make me feel better. Like, it's a slight difference.
Honestly, I have a feeling that a lot of people do that though. I don't know. That sounds to me like a very normal thing. Not that I do that necessarily, but that doesn't sound out of the realm of possibility for just any regular parent to do that.
Oh, it's not. And again, if it's like a few times, I'm sure I've done that. But it's a difference between doing that a few times where you're like, okay, sometimes I am sad and I want to ask my kids for a hug, and that becoming the norm. and the norm for a child to take care of a parent's emotions. That's what we want us to stay away from. It's not your child's job to take care of your emotions and try and keep you happy. And Sarah talked about that, I think, in a really good way. It's okay for your child to be empathetic. It's okay for them to want to tune into those caregiver instincts that they have, but it's not their job to take care of you. You're still taking care of you.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
I was thinking about when you were really struggling with your own mental health and you were feeling anxious and all of those things. You didn't turn to our children to make you feel better. They maybe wanted to give you a hug or be playful with you, but you didn't turn to them to say, oh, daddy's having a really hard time right now. Can you help me calm down?
Yeah, I feel like they just inherently wanted to cuddle with me more. But yeah, I was not asking for that. I mean, for me, and maybe this is a guy thing. I don't know. I feel like it probably is. But I would turn more inward, right? So I'm not necessarily talking to too many people about it. It's more you kind of forcing me to
talk about
on
it,
the subject to heal, right?
Yeah. But I will say a lot of the adults I work with in therapy, they really struggled with being that parentified child. So the child who was put in the role of being a parent or was put in the role of being the emotional container for their parents' emotions. And I think a lot of people listening to this podcast probably can relate to that. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes their responsibility to take care of the parent's emotions and make the parent happy. And that stays with you till adulthood. So I think that that's a really valuable lesson and something Sarah has navigated so beautifully. I have a lot of respect for her and the way she was talking about how she tells her children that she's having a hard time, but she also lets them know it's not their responsibility. And I think it's beautiful to know that there can be both. You don't have to mask your emotions around your children. It's actually okay for your kids to see you have a whole range of emotions, and it's not going to mess your child up that you struggle with your own mental health. I think a lot of people who have depression or anxiety or PMDD think, oh my goodness, I'm going to ruin my child because I have this. No, you actually can understand the depth of all these different emotions. It's actually really beautiful and a gift to your child to be able to model that to your child, as long as your child knows that it's not their responsibility to fix you. So I loved this episode. Sarah is such a beautiful soul. It was incredible to listen to her talk, and I hope that you loved it as much as we did. Hey friends, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. We are glad that you are here. If you enjoyed today's episode and found it interesting, we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a rating and a review. Scott and I actually sit down together and read them all. A 5-star rating helps us share our podcast and get these important messages out there. Thank you so much for listening, and we can't wait to talk to you again next time.